So you've got a river or a creek that you fish all the time and have still never figured out how to catch big bass in a river. Let's talk about it. How's it going, everybody? My name is Tyler. This is my channel called Tyler's Reel Fishing, and today we're going to be talking about how to catch big bass, specifically largemouth and smallmouth. I guess I'll lump spotted bass in there as well, but I'm talking, mainly about smallmouth and largemouth. How to catch big bass in a river. And I just came off of an awesome river day. If you guys want to check out some of the footage, I'll have it, playing over B-roll here of an incredible day fishing frogs, jigs, and flukes that I just got off the water. You guys can click the link down in the description below or up here in this corner. It was definitely one of the most fun days I've had in a long time, and it kind of prompted me to want to film an instructional about how to catch fish in a river system like this. Now we're going to talk about quite a few tips that I have for you guys. Some kind of, I think, common mistakes that people make when they're fishing rivers. But I want to start off by saying, of course, like any other instructional, I know a few things, but I don't know everything. And so I'm just sharing with you guys the knowledge that I've acquired over traveling and fishing for, 10 years now, that I hopefully can help you guys catch more fish as well. And so your river may be completely different. Your fish may act in a completely different way, but I'm just saying this is my techniques that I use. And as you can see from the video, if you click up there, it works. It catches big fish. And so I want to start off by talking about kind of what the river was like that I fished in today's video. So the river that I fished today was called the Mississippi River, and it is the very, very northern part in northern Minnesota as you get up to, I guess, where the river starts. I'm not sure where exactly it starts, but somewhere way up here. And it is a fairly skinny river with a majority of grass, wood, and rocks. There's not really a whole lot of giant boulder areas. There's not really any currents or anything like that. There's not really any giant, rapid areas. It's kind of a standard river, pretty windy, with a good mixture of cover in the river. There's a lot of rivers out there that are nothing but rock or nothing but grassy shorelines, like I fished in Minnesota about 2 weeks ago. And there's also some that are, like fly fishing trout rivers that are a whole bunch of boulders. So that's why I said this video might not apply to the exact river that you're fishing, but I think that some of these tips may be able to help you guys out. So topic number one that we're going to talk about is how to properly approach a river system, how to fish it, from what direction, all that kind of stuff. And so the main thing that I want to say here is that when fishing a river, you want to fish it from up current to down current. Because unless you have some kind of crazy trolling motor or motor system in the back that doesn't spook the fish, then if you try to fish up the river, you're going to end up scaring the fish. I'll talk about in a second. River fish are kind of spooky. You're going to end up scaring the fish by using your trolling motor or your big motor to get up to a spot and then fish. So what we did is we launched, at a high point in the river, and then you make what's called a controlled drift. So you will drift down the river as we did in the video up in the corner, and you'll basically control the way you drift. So we drifted with our nose of the boat down the river, kind of adjusting for the sides of the river that were better. And that's the way that worked for us. And that way we were able to, of course, electronics completely turned off. There's really no need in a river to have electronics unless you're fishing a wider river and you need them to run, any sort of, river channel or something. But we had electronics turned off, hydro wave was off, everything was completely off, and we're just drifting down the river. So that's the one thing that I would say is, if you can, try to make a river drift. Now, of course, if you're in a kayak or canoe, you can try to fish, from an area down up to the cover. So you're going to be stealthy in that situation, but you're also going to be using a whole lot of energy. And so if you can, I know most kayak and John boat guys know this, try to make a float trip out of your rivers. So start at one area, float down, and either have a pickup truck that you can, pick up all your gear and drive back to the starting area. Or if you're in a bass boat like I was today and the river is not too dangerous, float down. We floated down about 10 miles today and then drive up from there. And so that's the first thing that I would say, is that be as stealthy as you can. Of course, trolling motor on high to get around logs and such, but really have everything off. I wouldn't say you have to be quiet in the boat. You don't have to whisper super quietly, or else you're gonna scare the fish. You don't have to do that because generally the fish can't hear anything above the water, but I would say be as quiet as you can. Now, of course, you're gonna come into situations where, like this river here, any fishermen that are out here are either in a kayak, they're either fishing for catfish or walleye, and so they're not in the caliber of boat that we are. And usually, not to make a generalization here, but most fishermen in rivers are not, high caliber bass anglers. And so if you find a river that is untouched, sure, you can make some noise, sure, you can have your electronics on, but I found, especially in rivers, it's best to be as natural as possible. And in a big red wrapped boat, that's not easy. And so I want to have everything turned off. Now, of course, it would not be an instructional video without me telling you how to catch the fish. We've talked about the river that I was in, the type of way that I approach the river, but where do you find river fish? Now, river fish, of course, vary widely based on the species. So, of course, if they're trout, they're going to be in the current. If they're bass, they're going to be kind of in the current, but also hidden out of the current. And so for today, smallmouth bass up here in Minnesota, they're in a very specific spot, and that is where the river channel swings out. Usually that's where the river channel is, so of course it's going to be deeper there, and they're in any sort of current eddy that is in that river swing. So I'm going to pull up a river right now on Google Earth, and I'll show you guys a kind of a B-roll shot here of where the river channel is. I'll have it highlighted or something, and where the non-river channel is. And so of course you could find fish on that shallow area, but usually that is where the current is going to be weakest in that area. And so most bait fish, crickets, frogs, flies, whatever, are going to be swept more on the creek channel side, the river swing side. And so those fish are going to be tucked away behind any sort of current eddy. So I know I've talked about it in videos before, but whenever water hits anything, any hard substance, it basically splits or goes around that area, and it forms a little bit of a still water area behind that. It's called an eddy. And so you want to make sure you're casting in and around those areas, because smallmouth are strong, especially river smallmouth and river largemouth too, but they are not strong enough like trout to live in the current. So they can travel in the current from spot to spot, but they're not always going to be sitting directly in the current. They're most likely going to be just outside in those little current eddies. So like I said, it could be rocks, sticks. I've even seen some laid over grass, and a fish is sitting like let's say the current's going towards me and the grass is laid like this. The fish will sit with their head facing in the grass, and all you see is like the back half of their body. So really, like I said, anything harder than water is going to create a current eddy with the water, and that's really where the fish are going to be stacked up. So we caught them on frogs today, jigs, a fluke. Now, of course, you want to make a cast that is as far in the eddy as possible, all the way up to the bank, and pull it out from there, because these fish are usually looking up toward the bank to see any sort of frogs, crickets, whatever that are hopping out into the water. But don't be afraid to work it out 5 or 10 feet from the bank, because sometimes the smallmouth will see it and they'll follow it out. Of course, they're willing to expend a little bit of energy to follow something into the current, but as soon as they bite it, their head is turned straight back to their home. And so you want to have, like I'll talk about gear in a second, very, very fast reel and heavy line to get that fish out of that current. So that was kind of a 101 on how to catch fish. Like I said, there's plenty of variables in order to catch fish in those current eddies, but really you want to look for an area visually that you see the current of the creek, river, stream, whatever you're fishing has stopped or has kind of halted because of a piece of cover. Now, the gear that I'm using today was really kind of a trifold pattern: a frog for the top water, a jig for underneath the water, and a fluke for kind of that shad, higher water column fish. And really all three of those worked today, but they all worked in different spots. So the fluke worked more in like the open water areas. So let's say you had the creek channel was swinging on the outside and there wasn't any rocks, sticks, or grass. It was just kind of shoreline. So that's going to be a good area where, let's say, a piece of mud, a big piece of mud might be kind of implanted in the bank, and there's a tiny current eddy right around that piece of mud. A smallmouth could be sitting right in there, and that's a great place for any sort of moving bait. So even a crankbait, a jerkbait, a chatterbait. We just decided to use a fluke today, a soft jerkbait, and that works really, really well to catch those fish, kind of in the more open areas. The frog works really well for like the little indentations in the shore. So whenever you'd have shoreline grass, and then it would be like a little tiny, hole in the grass, smallmouth love to sit in those as well. And sorry, I guess I should stop saying just smallmouth, bass, because of course there are largemouth in rivers as well. And of course, if you find any sort of jam in the logs, or called a log jam, bass love to hide in those things, and it can be a struggle getting the fish out of that. And that is why I'm going to talk about here in a second. At least today, heavy line was very, very important. And so I want to talk about line real quick. River fish can either be one of two polar opposites. They can either be extremely pressured or completely untouched. And so the river we're fishing today was practically untouched. And so line size didn't matter whatsoever. And so we were throwing the flukes, the jigs, the frogs on 65-pound braided line, about the highest that I'll go for bass fishing, because I wanted to get those fish from the bank, from the wood, in the current, into my boat. And so as you guys saw in that video that's up in the corner and down in the description, we caught some awesome fish, some giant bass on 65-pound braid. But then you're gonna have times where those fish, they need something a little bit finessey because they've seen a whole lot of jigs, a whole lot of swim baits, all that stuff. And so they need some 15-pound braid to maybe an 8 or 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. Now, the more that you downsize your line, of course, the more chance you have of breaking off those fish. You know, any sort of nick in your line, when that fish takes off into heavy current and starts pull and drag, it's a lot easier for that fish to snap off. But just judge based on whatever kind of river or stream you have, how many people fish it, how many good fishermen actually fish it, because I fished an area last night that was a spillway, and the people that were there just weren't very experienced fishermen. And so I was kind of nervous walking up to the bank because I thought, oh, people have already fished it. But when I was fishing around those guys, I realized they had no clue what they were doing. And so I caught 30 fish last night on a little spillway coming off the river. So really pay attention to how many people are fishing your spot and how good of a fisherman they are, because that will really determine whether your line size completely matters or completely does not matter. Now, one more thing about baits that we're going to talk about is that you want to match the hatch as closely as possible. So I'd say the majority of the case, most rivers have fairly clean water because the river has to come either out of a lake or out of stream fed. And so the majority of the time when water flows, it's either going to be dirt, mud, or extremely clear. And most of the ones that I have fished are really, really clear. And bass feed more on sight than they do on vibration in reaction when they have super clear water. And so today, I'll show some B-roll shots here. These fish are eating leopard frogs. It's a frog that is everywhere on the bank in this area. I mean, the catfish, the bass, the walleye, the pike, everything eats leopard frogs. So this is one of the few times that I've actually fished where they're actually eating frogs, not throwing a frog for a bluegill imitation or a shad imitation. And so you want to make sure you are matching the hatch, throwing as close in resemblance of your lures to the forage they're eating as you possibly can. And that today was the leopard frog. Now, the last point that I want to make, which is a little bit of a disclaimer, is that river fish, because of the nature of them living in current, they're usually stronger. And so, of course, that requires stronger line half the time. It requires your drag to be, tightened up to get the fish out of there, and then of course loosened or using your spool to let those fish run a little bit. But because they are so strong and full of energy, when you get those fish to the boat, they are naturally not going to be completely spent of energy like a long fight on a lake would be. So if I catch, a 2-pound largemouth on a drop shot, I'm gonna fight him for 35 seconds, and by the time he gets to the boat, he's gonna be pretty much, out of energy per se. Like, I've lipped fish and they're just kind of like, no, hey, what's up? River fish are not going to be like that. River fish are going to shake like crazy. Make sure that if you're throwing a bait with any sort of exposed hook, so a treble hook like a topwater, a crankbait, jerkbait, even a jig hook or a frog hook, make sure that you are not getting your hands too close to the fish's mouth where the hooks are when they are shaking around, because due to the nature of these fish living in this current, they are stronger, they are harder fighting, and so when you get them in the boat, they're not going to be like a lake fish that is usually spent of energy, and you just put them in the live well or in your net and they're just kind of laying there. These fish are crazy. They will shake all over the place, and I've never been hooked crazy bad yet. In my 10 years of angling, I've never been hooked bad. I think I'm just more careful when I hold a fish. But the closest I have ever been is when I'm fishing a river, because those fish, especially with like a topwater spook, they shake their head like crazy, and it can easily lodge a hook in your hand. So when you can, use pliers. Make sure you're compressing the fish hard on the pressure points to get the hooks out, because I don't want any of you guys to go out on a river because I told you guys to go fish rivers, and the next thing you know, you're in the ER. So make sure you guys are being safe out on the river, both when you're running and when you're fishing. Oh, that was a lot of stuff. Well, everybody, I hope that you learned something in this video. I know that I make a river fishing episode at least once a year. I think it's because, YouTube viewers kind of recycle, but I love teaching you guys how to catch more fish. If you guys are new to this channel, please hit the subscribe button. I have some awesome instructional videos that I will link below as well about rivers, some awesome river episodes that I had catching spotted bass, largemouth, and smallmouth. Everything's linked below, including the tackle that I used in the video previously, and I'll link below my favorite river lures for both smallmouth and largemouth. And we'll see you guys on the next episode of TRF. See you guys.